The chaplains are the spiritual leaders of the Space Marine chapters and companies, looking after their battle brothers' psychological and spiritual well-being. On the battlefield, they act as warrior priests, raising the morale and spurring their battle brothers into a furious rage against the enemies of the Emperor. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the chaplains, the spiritual leaders of the Space Marines, with the standard chaplain today. So, the standard chaplain comes in at a rock-bottom price of 60 points, which is quite cheap. His stats are pretty solid for that cost. He moves 6 inches, toughness 4, a 3+ save, a 4+ invulnerable from his Rosarius, 4 wounds, leadership 5+, and OC 1, making him slightly tougher than a Space Marine lieutenant, who costs a few points more. He only has his sort of standard loadout, which is his heavy Absolver bolt pistol, which is one attack that hits on 2s at 18-inch range, strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. Then he also carries, of course, a Crozius Arcanum, his big staff of office, which has 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6, AP 1, and damage 2. These are both solid enough weapons. The Absolver bolt pistol sort of acts like a deagle, sort of. It's good at popping a Space Marine or maybe a guardsman. Then the Arcanum, Crozius Arcanum is a very solid melee weapon that is pretty good against most infantry targets. Now, his Recitation of Faith means once per battle, at the start of any phase, you can select a friendly Astartes unit within 12 inches that is battle-shocked. That unit is no longer battle-shocked. This is a solid enough rule that when it comes into play will be very impactful for winning the secondary game, but isn't the most powerful and is very matchup dependent. I did also forget to mention his Leadership 5+ is higher than usual, which does mean his unit will be very resilient to battle shock. Then his main buffing role, which you're getting for those 60 points, is very powerful. Litany of Hate means while this model leads a unit, each time that unit makes a melee attack, add 1 to the wound roll. +1 to wound is extremely powerful, and being able to get this on any of the Mark 10 squads is of course very useful, though this is only in melee, so while he can lead some ranged units, it's better to leave those to the other leaders. Overall, this is a great package for 60 points, and in general is going to be a solid unit that takes buffs very well, especially from enhancements or otherwise. So as I mentioned already, the Chaplain is about as cheap as a character gets at only 60 points, and his buffing rule is not bad in any way. +1 to wound, as I mentioned, is extremely useful and very easy to use. Simply charge into something and you will be more effective against it by a large margin. It helps you to punch down against hordes and also to punch up against things like super tough vehicles. While this pairs well with all of the melee units, really, the one that comes to mind first as a very interesting option at the very least is Assault Intercessors, since they get to reroll wounds when they're fighting something on objectives. With this guy in tow means they're getting +1 to wound and rerolling all wounds, which means they're very, very effective against most targets, though they still are held back by that low AP. But in detachments like Gladius Strike Force, or Gladius Task Force rather, you can get +1 AP for just 1 CP. Though the Chaplain is never going to be bad in any of the other units, things like Blade Guard veterans really appreciate the +1 to wound, which also extends to Inner Circle companions, so I think he's quite solid with both, though he may want a battlefield bust to get him there when he's leading them. Though he can lead things like Hellblasters and Stern Guard veterans, I would recommend leaving that for lieutenants or captains, as they're much better for that sort of situation, as he gives no buffs to range, and they don't want to be in melee generally, and his melee isn't really much to add as a countercharge threat. Bring a lieutenant in that way. As I mentioned, his leadership buff is minor, but it will be impactful when it happens, as it can be useful to flip an objective, or in general just to keep your units from losing objectives or not being able to use stratagems. In terms of other detachments, his buff isn't quite as useful in Inner Circle companions, as they get +1 to wound in a lot of situations, though in places like Sons of Sanguinius they will be extremely effective with +1 to wound going even further in that detachment, especially with Assault Intercessors with their +2 strength. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling, I hope you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Chaplains are some of the most venerable and respected members of a Space Marine chapter. Looking after the spiritual and psychological well-being of his brothers, they also act as guardians and finders of applicants that wish to become Space Marines, or are chosen to become them. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Chaplain on bike, for when a Chaplain needs to scream his prayers and chants at the enemy much faster than usual. So the Chaplain on bike comes in at 75 points. He has movement 12 inches, toughness 5, a 3+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, 5 wounds, leadership 5+. For the cost, this stat line is actually quite impressive. He's very fast for also solid toughness. He's a lot tougher than most Space Marine characters, and he's actually quite cheap in comparison. In terms of ranged weapons, he has his Absolver Bolt pistol, which acts as a sort of single-shot heavy bolter, 1 attack, that hits on 3s at 18-inch range with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2, a solid enough chance to blow up a Space Marine. Then he has his twin bolt gun mounted to his bike, which has 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. Then he, of course, has his Crozius Arcanum, which is 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6, AP 1, and damage 2, a solid Space Marine killing weapon, and does take buffs relatively well. Speaking of, in terms of abilities, he of course has Leader. He has the Litany of Hate as his main core buff, which is while this model is leading a unit, each time a model makes a melee attack, add 1 to the wound roll. This is a very, very solid buffing rule, and helps all kinds of melee weapons, especially mid-strength ones like the Chaplain's own Crozius. Then the Catechism of Fire, which is a prayer from the past that usually buffs ranged weapons, and it's no different here. Each time this model is selected to shoot, select one enemy within 12 inches that is visible. This unit's models gain devastating wounds against that target. Now this is a very solid buff, or rather it would be. The main problem with this is that the most you're getting out of this is just a damage 1, strength 4, AP 1 shot, which is, again, always good to have devastating wounds on, especially with the twin linked, but it doesn't really have enough power to be blowing up tanks or anything, and is still sort of just effective against light infantry, and maybe to some extent Space Marines given its AP 1, but it's not going to be winning any awards at range damage. Overall, though, the points and buffs that this guy comes for are rather solid for only 75 points, though here we start to hit the first snag. That's the leader options. He has 2, as he cannot lead Thunderwolves, which I thought he could, but he cannot. Outriders. The Outriders work fine as secondary sort of, Outrider units, but their damage is restricted to light infantry, and even with buffs isn't going to do much else against anything else just because it's bolters and chainswords, which are good with certain buffs, but not just +1 to wound, which won't help with their sort of mediocre AP, and also inability to wound super tough things. Well, the twin-linked devastating wound combo is fun. It isn't super efficient, because at most you're getting, 14 shots? That's still not that many devastating wounds, unless you start to stack things like sustained hits from Gladius Strike Force. Now the other options seem like they would be a perfect home for him. The Ravenwing Black Knights, while they are a much better option, and I don't think he's bad with them, their devastating wounds doesn't go quite as far on the Plasma Talons as they lack twin linked, making the synergy not quite as well. And the big problem is that against vehicles, which is the thing they need +1 to wound against the most, they're already wounding on 4s, which is sort of makes the +1 to wound moot, though it will help against things like Gravis Marines. Having 3 more Plasma Talons, though, from a command squad and better melee, is a lot better than just having devastating wounds on just a few Plasma Talons. So once again, he's not a bad choice, but is more so outclassed by the command squad, and as I mentioned, he cannot lead Thunderwolves. In terms of detachments, the Gladius is the standard take-all-comers. He isn't actually as good a target for Honor the Chapter, as he already has +1 to wound, so you're only getting the extra AP, which makes that not quite as efficient to use on him. The Anvil Siege Force kind of has the problem of where this guy likes to move, where this is quite a stationary army, and in general, he doesn't have much synergy there, though the Feel No Pain objective enhancement isn't bad. Given his speed, he can grab some far-flung objectives, and having Feel No Pains is not bad. Iron Storm, there's pretty much nothing for him there, but if you want an Outrider unit to be buffed, I guess he's a fine choice, though I would just buy more Outriders instead. And then Firestorm, the core buff is solid on his bolt guns and also does help Plasma Talons if you're running with Black Knights, but aside from that, not much there either. In terms of Stormlance, this is unsurprisingly where he's at his best. He really enjoys the +2 strength and AP, but unfortunately, just like with the Black Knights, this buff is considerably better on a command squad or on, say, a Wolfguard battle leader for the Space Wolves. I'm not super familiar with their rules. However, I know that their Thunderwolf Cavalry are nothing to sneeze at. Vanguard is sort of the similar story, where there's not too much synergy, though he is a fine target for the Ghostweave Cloak, just because he's fast-moving and relatively tough. That's a good combo to have for a lone operative. And then, unsurprisingly, the First Company Task Force, which is all about veterans, does not have anything for the Chaplain on bike, because it doesn't affect Outriders, obviously, and it doesn't affect Ravenwing Black Knights, which means that he doesn't have any sort of buffs he can have in First Company that are really worth anything, And I mean, First Company has a lot of issues, and I wouldn't really bring this guy in that detachment because he not only does not interact with the core rules, he doesn't do much else aside from that. So overall, he's probably at his best in Stormlance, or maybe Firestorm. So, the problem with the Chaplain isn't himself, it's more the units he can lead. As I mentioned, he can't lead Thunderwolves, which is where he would undeniably be at his best, as the Thunderwolves would love +1 to wound, with their mid-strength weapons that lack any anti-keywords. As I mentioned, the Black Knights have those anti-keywords, which means against the toughest stuff in the game, where this +1 to wound really should come into its own, it doesn't really do that much, as they're wounding them on 4s anyways. And with Outriders, his +1 to wound doesn't go quite as far, mainly because it's only strength 4, so you're still going to be not super efficient at wounding things, and also the low AP doesn't really help. So overall, out of the two choices you have to lead, there's a better option for the Knights in the very, very strong Ravenwing Command Squad, and Outriders are more of a utility unit. They don't really need a leader, and there's not really any interesting tech you can do with this guy. I suppose it's not the worst to give this guy Fire Discipline in Gladius, if you could get in range of your Oath of Moment target, and then maybe have, like, the Phobos Lieutenant. You could, or no, you don't need the Phobos Lieutenant, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. This guy in range for Catechism of Fire, you could probably get a solid amount of mortal wounds through using Fire Discipline, but I would say, again, Fire Discipline's better on Ravenwing Black Knights with a command squad, and overall, still, it's just not a great combo. Really what I'm looking forward to is either some sort of veteran bike unit, maybe something more akin to Chaos Bikers, but obviously they're Chaos and not Loyalist. Maybe when the so many birds, so many animal names. Maybe when the Space Wolves get their refresh, the Chaplain on bike will get a second lease on life in this edition, where he might be able to join Thunderwolves if GW's feeling generous. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me how you would use this guy down below. I'll see you all next time. Space Marine Chaplains are the priests and guides of the Space Marines, often watching them from the time they're an applicant to a fully fledged battle brother. On the battlefield, they lead their brothers to battle, firing them up with inspiring chants and recitations of their chapter's histories and great deeds. And some of them do it on a jump pack, when they really need to get to those enemies quick to preach their imperial truth, if you will. Anyways, the Jump Pack Chaplain comes in at 75 points, which is actually not too bad. Moves 12 inches, toughness 4, 3+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, 4 wounds, leadership 5+, and OC 1. And unlike a lot of Space Marines, he has a whole suite of weapon options. He has his Bolt Pistol, which is one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. But who cares about that when you can swap it out for any of the following? A Bolt Gun is 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Also pretty weak, so don't bother with it. Same with the Combi Weapon, which has anti-infantry and dev wounds. Rapid Fire 1, but it's less accurate at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1 at 24-inch range. The Grav Pistol is at least somewhat interesting, having anti-vehicle 2+, one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 1, and damage 2. Not a bad shot to just hit a tank with if you really want to. Then the Hand Flamer isn't exactly the strongest choice, though is very evocative in its imagery. It has Ignore Cover and Torrents, D6 attacks that obviously auto-hit at 12-inch range with only strength 3, AP 0, damage 1, but strength 3 really holds this back from being anything special. The Inferno Pistol, though, is a fun little sting-in-the-tail weapon with one attack that hits on 3s at only 6-inch range with strength 8, AP 4, and damage D3. It also has Melta 2, as it is a Melta pistol. This is a fun little pistol, though nothing to write home about, really. The Plasma Pistol has one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1, or you can overcharge for strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2 while getting Hazardous. Then the Storm Bolter has Rapid Fire 2, 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. That was a rather quick coverage, but I just want to say in terms of pistols, I'd say the best pistols are the Inferno Pistol, Grav Pistol, or Plasma Pistol. However, there is the problem that you can swap that out for a Power Fist, so he'll be having his Crozius and his Power Fist. The Power Fist is 4 attacks that hit on 2s, strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2, a very solid melee weapon. And the Crozius Arcanum is better against sort of medium to light infantry, with 5 attacks hit on 2s, strength 8, AP 1, and damage 2. He has the Litany of Hate, which is +1 to wound, and when he charges in, you roll a d6, and on a 4 to 5, the enemy suffers d3 mortal wounds, and on a 6, they suffer 3. Then in terms of leader options, he of course has the Jump Intercessors, as his main unit. they combo, unsurprisingly, very well. Obviously, the jump intercessors are very fast, and their special rule allows them to do even more mortal wounds, so when they charge in, they're going to average 4 to 5 mortal wounds on any target, which is very solid to help finish something off or just soften up a tank. And obviously, with the couple of power fists with +1 to wound, their melee is actually quite nasty against all targets. And if you can get extra AP, even better for those chain swords and the power fists. While jump pack veterans are certainly nowhere near as good as jump assault intercessors, I do think there is some fun to be had in their pistols. Particularly the flamer pistols, I think, are interesting in a detachment we'll cover soon. And then I would be remiss not to mention the Blood Angels, who I haven't played in a while, but their Death Company obviously need chaplains around to keep them functioning, and Death Company hit really hard, and this guy helps with that, of course. I'd say the best option, though, for the rest of the factions, and for a more secondary role, would be jump intercessors. Though I don't think Van Vets are totally awful. I think all 3 units are actually a solid choice, though my favorite is the jump intercessors, unsurprisingly, as I don't play Blood Angels that much anymore, and I don't even have any Death Company in my Blood Angels army, because it was pretty much just made out of Indominus and then a bunch of random units. But that's a story for another day, I suppose. And then in terms of detachments, on the core front, we have the Gladius, of course, which is the take-all-comers. They love the advance and charge and the assault doctrine, though he isn't the best target for Honor the Chapter, as he already has +1 to wound. However, he does love the extra AP, as does the jump intercessors he's leading. In terms of Anvil, he doesn't really have much buffs there indirectly, because he doesn't have any heavy weapons and likes to be on the move all the times, though he does have a fine enough applicant for the 5+ fuel no pain when you're on objectives, as these guys are quite good objective grabbers. Then in Firestorm, he quite likes the War Tempered Artifice, as that gives him +3 strength on his melee weapons, which is good on both the Crozius and the Power Fist. I forgot to mention in Gladius, this guy quite likes Honor Vehement for 6 attacks and a Strength 10 Power Fist. And then, swooping back around to Firestorm, there is something interesting you could do with Van Vets, where if you deep strike them and they all have hand flamers, that's 6 hand flamers, which isn't too bad for the Vulcan Hastan plus Mortal Wound Bomb with devastating wounds in that detachment. If at the very least not competitive, but it is cool. In terms of Stormlance, more speed is always good. These guys are fast, and going faster is better, and this obviously just helps them get around the board faster and lets them get to combat easier. Then in terms of Vanguard, I'd say that him alone, he's a fine target for the Ghostweave Cloak, just given his melee is pretty good, which combos quite well with just being a tough lone operative. And then in terms of the First Company, he's a fine leader for the Vanguard veterans, though I wouldn't say they're necessarily standout, and certainly not in First Company, as the First Company Task Force has a lot of problems, and just having this guy isn't necessarily going to fix them. Though I'd say out of the core detachments, his best is easily Gladius, and then I'd say Stormlance in a close second, with Firestorm in third. Oh, I forgot to mention Ironstorm. Fast-moving infantry are always a good addition to a tank force. This guy would be a fine candidate if you want a little bit more danger in your fast-moving secondary units. As we're going to cover here in just a second, their damage output is really impressive. The Jump Chaplain is rock solid. His combo of Crozius and Power Fist is really solid against all targets, and when he's leading those jump pack intercessors, they're obviously doing those mortal wounds when they charge in. He makes them pretty hitty, really. Jump intercessors with this guy in tow do have actually not a horrible chance at destroying something like a Land Raider, which would 100% make all their points back. And I already mentioned this, but in Blood Angels, if you're running Death Company, you need Chaplains, and the Death Company are on their jump packs all the time, so this is the best way to keep up with them. And as I mentioned with the jump pack intercessors, they're not that far off from just instantly destroying something like a Land Raider, and at the very least, if not destroying it, leaving it very crippled, and the same goes for Knights, really, though they might not survive the encounter. That does make them very good at finishing off units, even if they're only slightly chipped. Just that little bit of damage can allow them to finish off these super tough enemies. And then, of course, being jump intercessors, they're just very good secondary units in general, and this guy, obviously he is an addition onto that, because then if they're on the flanks of the army, they're really going to just annihilate any other secondary unit they run into, whether that's guardsmen, sisters, whatever it may be. These guys will rip them apart, unsurprisingly, especially well with this guy in tow. And then, of course, as I mentioned, they can jump into armor and pretty quickly deal with it with very little issue, and then go back to doing their secondary duties. And as I mentioned, I don't think it's super competitive, but there is certainly some fun theory crafting to be had with this guy and a team of Vanguard veterans with some sort of fun pistols. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.